Hello guys, my name is SVP and I'm back with another video. And recently, when I was looking at some VODs for players on my Discord, I noticed a few patterns when it came to hero choices. Mainly, players aren't always sure why you pick certain heroes in certain scenarios. So, I've decided to start a series called Thought Process, which will explain the thinking behind why we make certain decisions in the game and why certain things are better than others. And at some point I also want to talk you through some of my gameplay to let you know what I was thinking, both good and bad. But for this video, I'm going to start with the thought process behind picking main tanks. So let's get to it guys. So the reason I've started this series with main tanks is pretty simple. A choice of main tank will define a team's style of play more significantly than pretty much any other hero pick. You can't run dive with an Orisa and you can't run a bunker with Winston. So I'm going to talk through each of the three main tanks, and Hammond, who's sort of a main tank, and explain what each of their strengths are and why you'd pick one over the other. So let's start with the quintessential Overwatch tank, Reinhardt, who's been a staple of the game since Season 1. Now what are Reinhardt's strengths? Well, his biggest strength is obviously his shield, a 2000 HP mobile barrier that can be used to move a team around safely. And, in the right scenario, he can dish out more damage than pretty much any of the other main tanks. But getting this balance between shielding and damaging is a key to Reinhardt play. So why do you pick Reinhardt? Well, you pick Reinhardt if you want to protect your team, but you also want to drive them forwards. If you're going to stay in one spot, you may as well pick Orisa, whose shield is better. And if you're going to be running all the time, you may as well pick Winston or Hammond, who are more mobile. So Reinhardt is probably the best mix of both, which is why he gets picked so often, I assume. Now when does Reinhardt thrive? Well, Reinhardt thrives when there's a team behind him using the shield and space he's providing. Ideally, these are characters like McCree, Soldier, Ana, Zarya, mid-range characters who do best when Reinhardt can get them up close, but also keep them safe behind the shield. Reinhardt also does really well if you can get in amongst the enemy and start swinging away for huge cleave damage, which is why a Lucio is good to have alongside a Reinhardt, as you can get right into the thick of the action with him. Now, when does Reinhardt do badly? Well, it's quite a few occasions, and usually they stem from Reinhardt being the wrong tool for the job. If the enemy is running a lot of shield break and are stood far away from you, Reinhardt is going to struggle, because his shield breaks faster than say an Orisa, who can constantly refresh hers. An example of this would be Junkertown. Let's say you're on attack, trying to push the payload, and the enemy team have an Orisa and a Bastion set up. If you walk out of spawn and try to shield your team next to the payload, you are going to get melted, because there's no way your shield is going to outlast theirs. That also leads on to Reinhardt's second weakness, verticality. Any sort of high ground can really screw over a Reinhardt, since he has no way of scaling levels like Winston and Hammond do. For example, on Nubani Point A, if the enemy has a mobile comp which is able to switch between the low and high grounds, a Reinhardt just can't keep up, and this verticality can be abused to make Reinhardt look stupid. Finally, a very mobile comp, like a dive comp, can be very difficult for Rein to deal with, since they'll often bypass his shield, or provide too many angles for him to cover. But this also depends on what your team is running. So when should you switch off Rein, and when should you switch on to Rein? Well, in short, switch off Rein if A, your shield is being broken too often, B, you can't even get to the enemy because you're too slow or because you can't get to their high ground, or C, if the enemy is just bypassing your shield and they've got too many flankers for you to cover. Now when do you switch on to Rein? Well, if your team is having difficulty moving through a narrow choke, Reinhardt is quite often your guy. Like I said, moving a team around dynamically and constantly pushing forward is Reinhardt's greatest strength. And having the shield will often pull disorganized teams together to rally behind it. Also, if the enemy is brawling a lot but lack a shield tank, you can land huge fight-winning shatters for free, so look to exploit that window of opportunity. Next up is Winston. Now, as we go along this list, you'll start to be able to guess what these heroes are good for and not by process of elimination. So for example, we just said how Rein is bad when it comes to verticality, and you know who's not? This guy. Winston is one of the most mobile characters in Overwatch, and he's amazing at covering long distances quickly. His biggest strength is his ability to initiate dives, and also his ability to isolate targets and kill them quickly, both with his giant hitbox and his bubble, which can literally put people in a cone. He's very hard to ignore when he's in your face. You pick Winston if you want to jump into the enemy back line, and or you feel that they have a lot of characters who are away from the rest of their team and therefore diveable. So if the enemy has a sniper or two, Winston is great. The snipers will want to be as far back as possible, meaning they'll be away even from their healers. This lets Winston jump in, zap them to death in an easy one-on-one, and then rejoin his team for a 5v6. If you have a dive comp with you, like a Genji, Tracer, or Doomfist, this becomes even doubly effective, and you can kill heroes together faster. But when does Winston not do so good? Well, as you might have guessed, if Winston is good at exploiting split up enemies, he's not going to be so good when the enemies are really grouped together. Now, this isn't always the case, as his Tesla cannon does have great cleave damage. However, if the enemy are running a lot of shotgun or spray characters, like Reaper, Torb or Roadhog, then Winston's large hitbox can be easily exploited for a quick kill on him. And any team with a strong anti-dive, like Brig or May, is also a nightmare for our angry scientist. You want to switch off Winston if the enemy are running those kind of characters, or if they're just too clumped up. Only a well-coordinated dive could break up a team like that. And if you're not getting that in your solo queue games, you're better off playing a different tank. However, if the enemy is running a lot of DPS, or they're running heroes like Genji, Widow, and Hanzo, people Winston can easily one-on-one, then you switch onto the big monkey, zap him to death, and laugh all the way to the bank. Now, that brings us to our third main tank, and that is Orisa. Now, Orisa, to put it simply, is the sitting bull of main tanks. She takes one spot, and it's incredibly difficult to dislodge her, but if you shift her around, she's useless. So why do you pick Orisa? Well, like I said, if you want to control just one single spot, there's no better tank in the game. If you think Hanamura point A defense, an Orisa on the high ground can be incredibly difficult to dislodge, provided she has enough damage behind her. And that's when Orisa thrives, when she has other characters who also like to stay in one spot behind her. Junkrat, Torbjorn, Bastion. These guys want to just sit down and lay out the damage. So Orisa provides the perfect opportunity for them. The rechargeable shield can feel so oppressive if there's too much damage coming out from behind it. But if you have to shift around frequently, Orisa is easily exposed because she moves so slowly, and her shield can only be moved once every 8 seconds. And that is a long time in Overwatch to be without a shield. That's why payload is the only mode where you'll tend to see Orisa played on attack, because the payload will move the shield for her. In every other attacking scenario, you want to move a lot faster than Orisa will allow. Now, quite often, the maps where Orisa is good, she's good on both sides, like Junkertown or Nepal Sanctum, which means that you will often end up in an Orisa v Orisa match. In this scenario, it's important to note that the Orisa whose shield breaks first will almost always lose. So remember to get your team to prioritize breaking that shield. If they can't, and you're constantly losing the shield war, then you need to switch to a different tank and a different tactic. So, don't stick on Orisa if your team needs to move around a lot, or the enemy's bypassing your shield. And similarly, if you had a bunker comp and it got broken, you're going to struggle to set it up again. So it's best to switch off this particular Omnic. But, if there's a really good spot on the map you want to take, and you think you can set up there, then go ahead and pull out this 4-legged mech, because like I said, no one quite holds the spot like Orisa. So that almost wraps us up, except for one furry friend of ours, Hammond, aka Wrecking Ball. Now Hammond is not only the newest tank, but perhaps the hardest to categorize. He's a tank in that he has large HP pool, and he's great at making space, more on that later, but he also provides no direct help to his allies, kinda like Roadhog. Now let's talk about Hammond's strengths. His greatest benefit is that he's hella annoying. Anyone who's faced a good Hammond in comp will know how frustrating it is to have that big ball constantly rolling through your team and slamming you up into the air. So as a Hammond, your job is to make things easy for your teammates by annoying the enemy into paying attention to you and diverting resources to deal with you. Now when is Hammond best? Well, Hammond is the most solo-orientated tank in Overwatch, and this is both his strength and his weakness. If you've got a team with 3 or maybe even 4 DPS, then your best bet is to go Hammond. The reason that the pros have been running quad DPS comps with Mercy and Hammond is that Hammond is amazing at staying alive. With his personal shields, he can up his HP pool to the point of being almost unkillable. And he has more mobility than anyone else in the game, so he can escape really easily. This means he barely needs healing, and can use health packs instead. However, this is also why Hammond is not a great main tank in normal scenarios. If your team is running a standard comp, then Hammond will really struggle as a main tank. Like I said, he doesn't directly help his teammates. So in that scenario, it's much better to pair Hammond with Winston, so that the Hammond can have more of a free role and not have the responsibility of trying to protect or initiate for his team. So when should you switch off Hammond? Well, if your team is trying to slow push through choke points, then your annoying distractions are probably going to go to waste. A slow team can follow Hammond because he's pretty much faster than every other character in the game. But if you find yourself playing main tank, and your team are just all split up and completely disjointed, and maybe the enemy team is too, then Hammond is the best tank to thrive in that chaos. He's awesome at trying to split people apart and turn an organized comp game into a bit of a deathmatch. So if that's what the game requires, then go for it. So that just about finishes up this video, guys. I hope you found it helpful, and hope the concept is something that's valuable to you. I tried not to give you just a basic chart that was overly simplified with something like, if they pick X, because that's not the right way to learn Overwatch. Overwatch is constantly changing, and there's almost never one answer for every situation. You have to adapt quickly, so hopefully understanding the principles of why each tank is good and bad will help you make the right decision in those messy games that you'll inevitably get put into. And decision making is one of those factors in Overwatch that are just individual. It's just something that you have to learn for yourself. And if you try to follow some rigid guideline in every one of your games, you're going to find yourself really frustrated when it doesn't work out the way they said it would. So take as much knowledge as you can, get in your games, see what works, see what doesn't, and figure out what's best for you. As always, a big shout out to my patrons, and I'm so grateful for their support. If you like this video, please do like, share, and subscribe, and I'll be back next week with another video. See you guys soon.